this is a similar situation, right? Where there is a security concern right now in the country that's different than it has been in the past, in the sense that Ecuador was absurdly safe, for the last 10 years that I've been here and prior to that. And now there's some criminal activity, there's some organized crime, there's some sort of mafia, cartel activity, and that's concerning to people, but it has not in any way turned this country into some kind of... Hello and welcome back to the Ecuador Insider Podcast. Jesse, joined as always by Carlos Marson.
That's a nice way to say
something
it.
Brandon would say. Carl goes by Carlos a lot of times
Carlos,
here in Ecuador.
Carlitos.
Or Carlitos.
Most people will call me Carlitos.
As I usually go, I often go by my middle name, Tomas, or Thomas, because that's easier than Jesse, which turns into Yesy.
Yesy, that's a good one.
But hope you guys are doing well. We're gonna make a quick pod today on the election. We got election. Was it on Sunday? It's always Sunday, right?
Yep.
And
so a couple of days. Yeah.
Couple of days. Today is Thursday. Just got back from 24 hours, 30 hours in Guayaquil. Quick in and out trip for renewing my daughter's passport. Quite a pain in the butt, but it is done.
Nice.
So Grand Hotel Guayaquil. I was just mentioning to Carl. He's actually stayed there before. It's funny. You stayed there the first time.
First night in Ecuador.
First night in Ecuador, and I stayed there 10 years ago. The first time in Guayaquil in Ecuador.
Nice.
It's a great hotel. Highly recommend Grand Hotel Guayaquil if you have to stay in Guayaquil. Had a good time in Guayaquil, but we're going to talk about the election today. If you are interested in thinking about doing business living part-time in Ecuador, in Vilcabamba, in the surrounding region, we'd love to see you down here on October 13th. Got the date right this time. October 13th for our next Vilcabamba lifestyle retreat. This is a really enjoyable 9-day experience. You guys will be down here hanging out with us, traveling around the area, eating at phenomenal restaurants, staying at a beautiful hotel, and really learning everything there is to know in order to make a decision as to whether this place is where you'd like to set up your life or not. And so we'd love to see you down here on October 13th. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on all of the good information that we share, right? We have a seminar on visas, we have shipping containers, we have real estate, investing and doing business in Ecuador. We have builders, contractors, architects that tell you all about how you can build here. So it's packed with information. People seem to enjoy a lot of that as well. And we hope to see you here in October.
So link in the description below. Check that out. So one interesting thing. Oh, actually, hold on. I have to stand corrected. So on last week's episode, or one of the last two episodes, a commenter whose name I want to say Vivanco maybe pointed out that Rafael Correa's party has rebranded. So which I did not realize. They are no longer 35. They are no longer Alianza País. They are now number 5. They're no longer green. They're now blue. I don't remember the name of their...
Revolución Ciudadana.
The Citizens Revolution.
Yeah.
All right.
I think they rebranded some years ago,
Probably. Yeah.
But I remember the last election, I think it was still 35.
Was it still green?
Or Lenin Moreno was 35.
For sure. Yeah, he was definitely 35. I don't know if Arauz was 35 or 5.
Yeah,
they were in need of a rebranding, I think, based on the way the country felt about them as they left office. So they have rebranded. They're now blue. Yep. And Rafael Correa is the face. He's you see billboards and advertisements and things with Correa, has a warrant for his arrest in Ecuador.
That's right. Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, but his diehard followers, they want him back. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think it's part of the reason why they're promoting him, even though he has a candidate, Luisa Gonzalez. She's basically just a face, but he's really, according to what she even said that herself in an interview, that Correa would be back basically if she gets elected. So.
Yeah, it's wild though. I mean, so you've got a former president, who has a warrant out for his arrest in the country he was governing, who is on the political posters of a current candidate,
right,
who is promising to bring him back if it's Ecuador politics at its finest. But yeah,
Mhm.
so thank you for correcting my mistake. It is now cinco and not 35. But so yeah, so interesting time. There's about at this point probably 4 to 6 somewhat serious candidates. Obviously, one was assassinated, which we talked about extensively in a previous pod, probably about a week ago now. At this
Mhm.
point, um, I understand that CNA just approved the replacement candidate for him. I don't haven't seen any polling as to whether I think it's a she, I believe, will how
Mm.
she's doing in the polls. Um, we've got we've got the Correa candidate whose name Luisa.
Luisa Gonzalez.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So she'll win the first round
She's number one in the polls. Yeah,
for
she'll
sure.
definitely
It would be very unlikely for anyone to surpass her, but it's also very unlikely that she'll hit the 40% she would need in order for there to not be a second round. So there'll be a runoff between her, very likely, and someone else. She's from the far left. We have another candidate from the left, Yaku Perez, who's somewhat of the indigenous party candidate, you could say. He's known to be an environmentalist. Different polls have him either doing pretty well or not at all, so
That's interesting.
it's hard to know at this point. Then there's Otto. How do you pronounce? Do you know?
Sonel Holzner.
Very
That's how they
good.
say
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that was excellent.
That's with the Spanish accent.
Right.
Otto Sonel Holzner.
Which it sounds like a German last name.
Yeah, I think he's got some origin of, I'm not sure exactly which country.
So some of the polls have him in second place. He's more conservative. Then there's Jan Topic, which they call him Rambo.
John Topic, yeah.
Jan Topic. They call him Rambo, which is just funny because I guess he was in the French, I don't know, army or militia or French, mercenary. I don't know exactly. I
Yeah.
haven't studied this in any detail, but
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. He was a sniper, if I understand it, francotirador in the military with the, I forget what it was called, the French battalion, or a lot of people joined this. I guess it's a thing. I've met some
I don't
people
know.
from like Ukraine and other countries that would join this, like French paramilitary or military thing.
okay.
Yeah.
So he's kind of the security candidate for a lot of people. Then let's see, is there anyone else that's making noise that has a chance at this point?
Daniel Novoa.
Yeah, that's interesting. So he's kind of all over in the polls as well. And is that Alvaro's son?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So Alvaro Novoa is an interesting character. He's almost like, I don't know, he's almost like the Donald Trump of Ecuador politics. Boisterous, loud, says whatever's on his mind. Very popular in some circles. Some people think he's crazy. Very successful businessman. Novoa is a very famous family here in business circles from Guayaquil. So, I don't know much about him.
Yeah.
I assume he's from the right, political right as well.
Yeah, they're a big business family. They own a lot of the banana plantations, from what I understand.
And then
I hear some good things about him, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's gonna be definitely interesting time here politically. So when I was driving to Guayaquil, and I've driven around this country quite a few times during political season, during campaign season. When I was driving to Guayaquil, I was really surprised how few signs, because this time of year in Ecuador, you see political signs absolutely everywhere, like literally everywhere. In my entire and the coast is known as a very sort of socialist area. Like they always vote for the Correa party pretty strongly. The mountains and the Sierra. I'm sorry, the mountains and the Oriente, the Amazonian region, are more conservative politically. And I saw almost no advertisements for Luisa, for the Correa candidate, which was very surprising. I saw a lot of Otto. I won't try his last name. I saw a lot of him. I saw a ton of Villavicencio. Like he was everywhere. The deceased Villavicencio. Quite a lot of Jan or John Topic. Those were kind of the main ones that I was seeing over and over again, including in Guayaquil, which tends to be a very socialist kind of left-leaning area. Interestingly enough, you were showing me some polling, and who knows, like I don't, you know what the how accurate the polling is, but it seems that the Correa candidate has lost about 10 points or possibly even more since Villavicencio's death,
Since the debate as well,
or
right?
since the debate
But,
as well,
but
right?
both of those things happened very close.
Yeah, and which is interesting. And then it seems that the sort of the security candidate, Jan Topic, has risen potentially
Significantly.
substantially.
Oh yeah, I think he had like 7% in the polls. He was like under 10%, pretty consistently, and now he's up like closer to 18, 20 or something, at least like in the 15 region percent. So like doubled in popularity more or less. And I think a lot of it has to do with the debate, really, because I watched it and I could see why people would, because I don't think he was very well known potentially before that, but he was very smart, very well spoken. He was very polished. I mean, I think he did really well in the debate, and that really he's shown. And most of his plan was about increasing security and safety in the country, and all of the ways he was going to do that. And that's the main concern for Ecuadorians right now is the crime, the increase in crime. So
Yeah, and that was interesting in some of the polling you showed me as well. That uh, out of a number of subjects, uh, insecurity is the number one subject of importance to voters by far. I think it
Yeah.
was 50 something percent. Then the next one was at maybe 30%, which was also not an economic. I think it was corruption. Was second
second,
at
right?
like 20.
Political corruption, right?
Right, and then the economic issues were further down
Mhm.
the list, which is interesting. It definitely seems a higher likelihood that a more conservative, more security-oriented president potentially will win. Again, if they count the votes, who knows about any of that as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few days. And then they're only in power for, is it 2 years or less?
Let's see, I think it's 16 months.
16 months, right?
Right.
And then we'll have elections again, and that's because the previous president, who's current president Lasso, issued the death cross, which dissolved Congress and gave him 6 months of rule and then an election. So we have this sort of emergency election. This has never happened before in this country's history. Then there'll be, I guess, 16 months of rule, and then elections again to see if it's, they carry on with the same or go in a different direction. So wild times here politically. I think part of what I want to touch on is it's just like, it's so easy for all of this stuff to be scary and sensationalized. And I think, I've seen just sort of anecdotally from some stuff that people have shared with me at the company or clients' emails or comments or things that have gone on, that people are reading international headlines and they're getting scared, right? And they're kind of, and it's like, I think it's so easy to do that. And I just kind of want to give a little bit of our perspective, a little bit of sort of a reality check from a couple of guys who are on the ground here, who've lived here for 10 and 12 years. What it's like. So, it's like I think if you were to read, if you live in the U.S. and you watch the news, I think you would be terrified to visit Chicago, for example, right? Like, but you can visit Chicago safely, no problem. Same with all these other cities that look scary if you don't know them, and you're watching the news. I think kind of this is a similar situation, right? Where there is a security concern right now in the country that's different than it has been in the past, in the sense that Ecuador was absurdly safe, for the last 10 years that I've been here and prior to that. And now there's some criminal activity, there's some organized crime, there's some sort of mafia, cartel activity, and that's concerning to people. But it has not in any way turned this country into some kind of war zone or some kind of place where you have to be scared or you have to worry about your safety in some kind of unordinary way at all. There's some activity amongst the mafia, basically, which the country is the citizens, the people here are very upset about,
Mhm.
and do not want to see continue at all. And that's the number one topic on people's minds. And so we'll see politically like how it all unfolds and who becomes president and what kind of security measures they take and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of this stuff is just some of it is just sort of the media blowing things out of proportion. And I think some of it is just some of the gyrations of Latin American politics, that are different, than we're used to back home.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and really here where we are, Vilcabamba, province of Loja, is one of the safest provinces in Ecuador. I believe that the Amazonian regions might be safer in terms of crime. There's a little less crime there. But overall, compared to the coast, compared to Quito, which is the capital, this region here is very safe. And a lot of those things, we don't really see any of this here.
No.
Like, there's the occasional break-in, there's the occasional, thing. There was, right, someone who was murdered at some point. It happened a couple of times, maybe in the 12 years that I've been here. And, but those are very isolated events, very uncommon. I mean, that's why the whole community was, mourning, and it was a tragedy for everyone because it's so unusual that it happens. But yeah, overall here it feels very safe. I wouldn't say the same about Guayaquil or Machala or these big coastal cities. Most expats don't want to live in these places anyways, but there's definitely been a significant increase of crime in those areas. But here, I mean, there's been a slight increase, but it's still feels like a very safe place to live. Otherwise, I wouldn't live here with my family, with my 2 kids, if I thought this place was dangerous.
No, of course. Yeah, and again, right, I think it's all like what you're comparing it to. So I just want to address that. I think if you're interested in this place because it calls to you in some kind of way, the lifestyle, the nature, the community, whatever it is, the culture, I would not let scary international headlines deter you. Unless you're looking for something to push you the other direction, then that's different. Use it and don't come. But for real, I mean, I think as humans, like, it's very easy for us to latch on to stuff that sounds scary and to be scared and to have something to talk about and those kinds of things. But in terms of everyday life in Ecuador, this stuff, we only talk about this stuff on the podcast.
Yeah,
we don't, like, nobody talks about it at all outside of that. It doesn't affect our lives in any way. Like, it's not. So just to make people kind of put some of that in perspective.
Sure.
I think this is just a beautiful place to live and extremely safe and so on and so forth. And interesting. You get to watch this kind of show now that we're gonna see this sort of back and forth between between whatever criminal element there is and the government and how that plays out. But yeah, it has very little effect for the most part in many places of the country on your actual population.
Right. Yeah, not to minimize it, right? There's people that are affected in the areas where it's happening, but it really isn't happening here. Like, there's not. My understanding is a lot of the drugs, a lot of the cocaine, crack, etc., is processed and made in Colombia, and Ecuador, like the north of Ecuador, sort of all the way to the coastal areas, is kind of a route where the transport and then it leaves Ecuador in shipping containers, and that's some of those areas where there's maybe more conflict between different groups, potentially different cartels, and also between the government, the police and the cartels. But yeah, the day-to-day citizen doesn't really get affected. He's not involved in any of this stuff, right? As long as you don't get on the mafia's bad side for whatever reason, like, you're probably good in most cases.
Yeah. So we are let's see, we are mid-August here, where we should have, the weather's been a little strange the last couple of years. We actually had the rains come back.
There's been a little bit of rain
recently, a bit, yeah, which is extremely unusual for August. But this has basically been the weather for a few weeks now. Just beautiful, bright, sunny skies, hot days, lovely time to go to the rivers and swim in the rivers, take the kids, take the family. We've been doing that quite a bit. But yeah, we got a couple more months of dry season still until we get back to rainy season. Fernando, our photographer, was just telling us it's been extremely cold, or not cold, but extremely rainy in Loja.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
They're worried about the rivers coming
Already?
up out of their bed.
Mm.
So we'll see. We'll see. That's happened a couple of times since I've been here. But yeah, the weather's been absolutely spectacular here recently. So yeah, what else? Anything else we want to get into on this particular episode?
I mean, we could touch on El Nino. Apparently, El Nino's coming this year. That's what I hear. So it hasn't started yet, but maybe that's why we got a little bit of the rains we've had lately. It's because the phenomenon, weather phenomenon, El Nino is coming to town. So some people are worried about like rivers, overflowing a bit and whatnot. Overall, here in this region, there's nothing catastrophic that ever happens. Right? There might be a river that overflows and takes a little bit of land right on the riverfront. Not very common either, but yeah, we don't have any earthquakes or tornadoes or. I mean, there are earthquakes in Ecuador, but we don't feel them very much here. We do feel a little bit of them, but the epicenter is never here. So the natural disasters, there's not really anything here that happens in our region, which is one of the reasons why people move here as well, looking for a place that's safe from any natural disasters. And this region is one of them.
Yep.
Another interesting thing here for expats is once you're a resident for a couple of years, you're allowed to vote legally. So we're allowed to vote.
Technically, it's 5 years.
It's 5 years?
But they put you on the rolls right away.
Okay.
You can vote.
Okay, right. So yeah, because I voted before. But Ecuadorian citizens, though, if they don't vote, they get penalized. They have to pay some kind of multa, some fine, right?
Yep, $50.
$50.
What I understand.
So 90, like a very high percentage of Ecuadorians vote, 98% or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like people are traveling back from across the country to vote,
right?
On election weekend, and
because you're supposed to vote where your cedula says you're from,
you're like registered at a particular place,
and you have to ask to be registered elsewhere. Or whatever.
And it's got to do it a year or two in advance. It's like
interesting.
A pain in the ass,
Interesting. Yeah. So it's nice. We're treated like Ecuadorian citizens. Like we're allowed to vote, even though we're not Ecuadorian, but we don't have to. So.
Well, and a lot of people vote like nulo or anulo. I don't know. Nulo, I think it is.
Sure.
Like white. Yeah.
Blank.
Like blank. Right. Because you're required to vote, as you mentioned, but you don't have to actually vote for a candidate. You just have to show up.
Sure.
So the nulo gets like a decent percentage.
Interesting. Yeah.
In most elections. There's also the dry laws over the election weekend. So there'll be, I think it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or at least Saturday, Sunday. No alcohol sold. Of course, not that many places will follow that rule, but some will.
I think you're right about that, yeah. Interesting. Do restaurants have to?
They're not supposed to.
Interesting. Wow.
They're not supposed. I think. Yeah, because I've had restaurants like covertly give me a beer in like a styrofoam cup or whatever. Just yeah. So I think it does include the restaurants unless that's changed more recently.
Yeah. Yeah, so the elections are coming up. We'll see what happens. We'll comment on it once it's done next week. But I think overall, for me personally, and I'm not super involved in Ecuadorian politics, like I've watched the debate. I thought it was very interesting.
You did watch the debate. I found it interesting that you watched the debate.
No, I thought it was great. It's nice to analyze different candidates, what they have to say. Of course, they're reading a script, most of them, I think. But there were some candidates that honestly, they didn't even know how to. It was kind of funny and ridiculous to see how they just weren't prepared, and they didn't know they didn't understand the format of the debate is what it was actually, which was quite funny. There's been some memes on social media about these candidates, people making fun of them. I think they lost quite a bit of traction in the polls, but yeah, my point I was gonna say. For me personally, even if the socialist government, Rafael Correa, Revolución Ciudadana, even if they came back, I think overall our life wouldn't be affected that significantly out here. Potentially it'd be bad for business because investors pull their money out of Ecuador typically when that happens, because the taxes ramp up and there's more taxation, and they're trying to take more from the rich and give to the poor. That's the idea behind it in a way, socialism. But even then, I think I'd still think this place would be great to live. And when Correa was in power, when their government was in power, I think life was nice here. Actually, it was pretty much the same. It was very peaceful and quiet, and a lovely place to live. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that stuff, right? Like anywhere you are in the world, and forget, that you can just also enjoy your life and not
Yeah.
not necessarily worry about it too much. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, the biggest effect, right? Security does matter at this point, right? So we do want a candidate who's not in bed with the cartels. We do want our president, I should say. We want a regime that is willing to, and this is my opinion, of course, but I think the whole country shares his opinion more or less at this point. We want a, we want a regime that's willing to take on the cartels and do what is necessary to get that situation resolved. And then then the other thing that does get affected quite a bit, like you mentioned, is asset prices, business, taxes, things having to do with wealth. So in the last couple of years of Correa's presidency, I should say, there was a lot of capital flight. There was a lot of people getting their money out of the country. People had trepidation to invest here, to open businesses here, to put capital into the country because they didn't know what the next proposal would be, what the next law would be, sort of going after wealth. And so, I think that's really the biggest sort of difference that you could have between parties, between regimes. At the end of the day, there's always loopholes. There's always ways to make things work, it's much more of an effect if you're planning on investing or doing business in the country. If you're not, it's probably not as big a deal. Right. And what we've seen over and over again is that the Ecuadorian people, the people of this country, have a limit in how far in that direction they will go. So people will not allow the country to turn into a Venezuela. We've seen that over and over again. They will literally, remove a president before they'll allow that to happen. And, I'm not a political analyst. I don't even follow this stuff very closely at all. But if I had to guess what will happen in this election, and then of course you have to ask yourself if they're really counting votes or not, which I have no idea. But if I had to guess how this election would go at this point, and there could be lots of gyrations between now and election day, with Luisa, whatever, being down at 20%, the Correa candidate being down at 20%, very likely she will lose to whoever she's against. So unless that's Yaku Perez, which doesn't seem likely at this point, he's more of an environmentalist than anything else. Unless it's him, very likely we're going to have a right-leaning security, interested in security president. Don't hold me to that. I have no idea how this is going to go, but that would be my guess at this point. For what? For a little over a year, and then they'll do it again, and we'll babble about all this stuff again, and the gyrations and cycles continue. So
Otto Sonel-Holzner, he was vice president under Lenin Moreno.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that. That's right.
So that's more of a left leaning.
Yeah, although all the people on the left say that Moreno betrayed them and went to the right.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
who knows?
Because he seems more like a conservative guy in the debates, but and so I think he's pretty up there in the poll as well. He might be number 2 actually in some of the polls I've seen. So there's him, there's Jan Topic, who's the conservative Rambo guy. Lots of people that I've spoken to, we even have comments on our YouTube channel. Jan Topic.
Yeah.
He's the guy who's wanting to put a, because they say mano fuerte, or heavy hand on the cartels and the crime, and beef up the police and beef up the security and put camera surveillance and all the gas stations and
Yeah.
He said something along the lines like the thieves or the robbers, the criminals have to know that if they show up to your house and try to rob you, that they'll get shot, right? Basically saying that the people would be allowed to have firearms for self-defense and whatnot. So some Ecuadorians like that.
Yeah. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this, please put a like on the video. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Give us your opinion. Tell us why we're wrong. Correct anything we screwed up. We are not experts. We're just giving you our thoughts here as 2 guys down in Ecuador. And let's see what happens. We'll talk about it again after the election. Again, we'd love to see you down here on October 13th for the Vilcabamba Lifestyle Retreat.
We hope to see you here one day, and until then,
see you next time.
If you're interested in real estate properties, all of our property videos will now be uploaded on a different channel. Please click the link in the description down below.